It's the Daily Solutions Podcast.
All right. Yeah, welcome everybody.
Woo!
So we got a question today about transitions. How long is the optimal time for a transition?
Great. Yeah. So let's, I guess, start with what a transition is
Yeah.
for those who don't know. So transition is just the single craziest time that happens in your float center, which is in between floats when the rooms need to be turned over. And lots of times, a lot of your operations will center around this transition time. So you have your float, the person gets out, and then as fast as humanly possible, you need to run the pump, clean the room, get it totally set and sanitized and ready for the next floater who's coming in.
So how long for transitions? What do you think?
So I don't know. I mean, first of all, half an hour seems to be really the industry standard.
That's definitely the one you see the most commonly.
I don't know of anyone who has successfly done under half-hour transitions and kept them. I know someone who started with 20 and then they switched to half an hour.
I was trying to think about it too. Like I've been trying to rack my brain for who I know that does less than half an hour, and I haven't been able to think of anybody.
Yeah, so if you're out there and you're doing under half an hour transitions, write us in. We'll send you a little trophy or something like that.
A picture of a trophy, probably. But
we're not rich over here.
But yeah, so 30 minutes or I do know some places do longer. I mean, so 30 minutes is very, very common, but I've definitely seen centers that do 40 minutes, 45.
Even up to an hour, I think.
I've seen a place that does an hour. I think I've seen a place that does like an hour 15, maybe. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I know, hardcore. But, so we do 30 minutes at our place, and we actually do 6 tanks, and we switch them over all at once. So we do a 6-tank transition in 30 minutes. That's pretty crazy. I actually don't know of a lot of other centers that do a 6-tank turnover in 30 minutes. Like most centers I know of that are 6 tanks or around that size or bigger are often doing, 3 tanks on this hour, 3 tanks on that hour sort of setup or some sort of staggered schedule.
Yeah, and the other side of this too, which we'll just mention as a side point, is probably worth its own podcast episode, is how to run the transitions and how to time them. And I think a lot of people go into opening a float tank center thinking that they're going to have their tanks on this staggered schedule of when the floats are going to run and when their transition time is going to be, so they can run it with more like one staff on hand who can cycle between these transitions. And in reality, lining up your transitions ends up being a lot more feasible, if for no other reason than just noise. The noise of opening and shutting doors, the noise of running the pumps, which tends to go between any rooms that are adjacent to each other. In practice, it ends up being really hard to actually do this fully staggered kind of transition schedule. So you do end up with people who are either all of their tanks are on the exact same schedule, or maybe they have one half of their tanks on one schedule and one half on the other. And there are centers who do manage to get every single tank on a staggered schedule, but that's a lot less common, and sound pollution is the reason for that.
Usually when someone's able to stagger it, they'll have tanks on opposite sides of a hallway as the actual barrier. So 3 tanks on one side of a hallway on one schedule and 3 tanks on the other. And a hallway tends to be with kind of the normal amount of soundproofing that centers do. A hallway tends to be enough buffer so that you can't hear the pump noise from one side to the other side. And not having a hallway tends not to be is typically what we found. So from one room that's sharing a wall with another one, it's pretty hard to not hear the pump from one to another, but a hallway is usually enough. So we'll see that. I mean, it's basically how you do your schedule. It's almost like a noise versus staffing question. Those are the big things on either side. Noise pollution is the best reason to keep your floats on the same schedule. And how many people you need working your shop at any given point in time is the best reason to stagger your floats. So those are the 2 big contenders that you're trying to find a balance between.
And of course, there's a huge incentive too, going back to your original question of length, to keep the transition time relatively small in between there. One, if you're on a staggered schedule, the length of time means you're just interfering with the other floats less time because you're making less sound. And just for a pure monetary reason, the shorter your transition time is, the more floats that you can run in a day, which obviously very directly affects your bottom line for how much money you can bring in.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's And I guess the other part is just how chaotic everything feels. Like you got to get when you have these fast transitions, you got to get good at both doing them quickly and having this like aura of peace and calm and, everything's under control sort of happening in your lobby space.
At our if you go kind of backstage at Float On, you'll see during transition time our staff just sweating and running around like crazy between the rooms, and then they walk out the door to the lobby and they just are totally composed and they've wiped their brow with rag to make sure that their sweat isn't just dripping onto the floor, and they're like, oh, hello, can I check you in? And then they walk back, oh, I just need to check on something, and then full blown just running across the hallway again. So yeah, keeping that front of house versus back of house kind of energy good is a challenge for sure.
Yeah. That said, we do pull it off. I mean, it's a little tricky, and every once in a while we do get someone into their float tanks late just because, the way that people ended up coming out, if they were taking a long shower or something like that, or at the end of the day, that does happen to us and probably would happen less if we had longer transition times, but we make it work. We can flip 6 tanks in 30 minutes with 2 people and get that next batch of people in, and have been running that way for years at this point.
And sometimes there's just no getting around it. Sometimes you do have to get your customers in a little bit late. If someone gets out with only 3 minutes left before the next person's float, there's just no getting around that. So What do we do to encourage people to make it out of their room on time, I guess is a good question. Like, how do we minimize the amount of times that people just take forever getting dressed and getting ready?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of float centers have some kind of put yourself together room, vanity room outside of the float tanks where you have like hair dryers and stuff like that. So I think that is one way that people are able to, take some of the time that someone would need to put themselves back together and have it happen outside of the float room.
Right, yeah, makeup time, hair drying time,
right,
all of that stuff. The more you can have that happen not inside the actual float room,
yeah,
obviously the better for transitions. We also have some different wake-up tracks that we'll play. So this is to deal with specifically people who are really deep in that float experience. So we kind of have our initial floaty, mellow tracks that come on to lightly bring people out of their experience. And then we have our kind of more upbeat one, like Get Up, Stand Up is one of my favorite songs that we end up playing to people in the float tank if they're not getting out. And then we actually also recorded my lovely voice coming in and pretty much informing people like, hey, the sound of my voice means your float is actually over, and kind of spell it out for them. Again, the music isn't just playing so that you can stay in here and enjoy yourself. You should actually get up and shower off and probably get out of the float tank and rejoin the rest of Consensus Reality.
Yeah, I mean, and other than that, we don't really have a ton more control over it. Like, they're going to shower and get their clothes on and come out, and like other than people not, once they're actually aware that they have to come out of their float and are in the process, like there's not much else we are able to do.
Yeah, I'd say, so a couple things. One is driving it home during the intro speech is another really good one. So when you're first introducing people to the tanks for their very first float that they've come in for, during that speech, actually reminding people that, hey, there's people coming in after you, so, especially when you're getting out of the tank, if you could just kind of try to shower and get dressed at a reasonable speed.
Yeah, it's usually like I tend to phrase it in the positive, like, hey, afterwards you got about 15 minutes to shower off and get ready. And because I feel like some people get nervous that they're taking too long, too.
Sure, yeah.
And you don't want to, like, create this, like, feeling of stress after hopping out of a float tank that they're kind of, like, delaying your business operations or something. So letting them know, like, hey, don't worry about it. You got about 15 minutes. Like, it lets them know how long they have and allows them to be comfortable kind of showering and putting their clothes on as long as they know they're kind of in that window of time.
Yeah, totally. And then pumps are also another part of this, right? Actually getting in your full pump cycles to make sure that the water is fully filtered in between every person who's coming in.
Right.
And this is one that also might be deserving of its own full episode, but just really briefly, and without going into too much explanation, at Float On, we're very careful to never run the pumps when someone is actually still inside a float tank. And again, that can go into much deeper explanation. We're basically afraid of hair entrapment. But as a result of that, we always need to make sure that people are physically up and outside of the tank before we start running the pump. Which means that for us, we end up being big creepers and listening at the door to the float rooms for if their showers are running. And right now, we're just having something installed with shower sensors where we can see on a little controller whether or not the showers have come on in the different rooms and how long they came on for, and actually have a really good sense for who's out of the float tanks, which is really nice. And even with that, we still try our best to not turn on the pumps, even when people are still inside their float rooms. But ultimately, it takes our tanks about 15 to 17 minutes to cycle through the 3 or 4 turnovers that we need for our filtration. And if it hits that 45-minute mark and someone is showering but isn't out of the float room, then we'll still turn on the pump when they're in there. And oftentimes we'll give them warnings beforehand too, again, during the walkthrough speech, letting them know that, hey, if we're getting close to that 15-minute mark, we might have to turn on the pump while you're in the shower, and that might kick on and make a little noise. So just a little warning. Otherwise, it can totally freak people out when this really loud, monstrous pump kicks on and they're in this relaxed state. And I think that's about it for trying to make sure that the transitions actually happen in that half-an-hour period.
I mean, the other nice thing about our center is I would say like the 90-minute floats is a bonus when it comes to things like this. Like getting someone in 5 minutes late off of a 90-minute float, I think is just kind of less of a big deal than getting someone 5 minutes late in a 60-minute float. People tend to be more forgiving, and like it just doesn't seem to be that much of a kind of issue when it's like 85 versus 90 minutes.
Or like a half-an-hour float. I bet those people are pissed if they need to get in like a little bit late even. And we notice it for 2.5-hour late night floats too. We've gotten in customers like 10, 15 minutes late for the 2.5-hour floats, and they just do not care. Like that's a long enough time where they're like, okay. And I guess there is one other point too, which is if we do get people in late for the next floaters going in, get them in 5 minutes late or even something like 10 minutes late, a lot of times what we'll do is we'll try to make that up on the back end. Right, so we'll say, hey, we'll keep you in for as long as we can. And this is one of the nice things about being able to run music separately in your different float tanks. But we'll turn on the music for everyone else and then turn on the music for them after another 5 minutes or after another 10 minutes and just let them know, hey, if you could try to shower and dress off pretty fast afterwards, then at least you'll have that longer float experience and we can kind of get things back on track. And so that's another way that we kind of correct, I guess, throughout the day.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. All right.
Okay, then.
Settled. We settled that
Good.
one. Yeah, done.
Thanks for joining us, everyone. Thanks for joining.